Welcome, everybody, to the Brown Bears Sports Report, and I guess our first unofficial podcast in Brown University athletics history. My name is Scott Credisci, and we're happy that you could join us. I am joined right now by Brown's Director of Athletics, Jack Hayes. Jack, how are you?
Scott, thanks for having me. Doing okay. Quite a week.
These are unprecedented times, no doubt about it, that we're currently going through.
Yeah, I mean, 31st year in the business. You could, if I was lucky enough to be in it another 31, I can't imagine you could ever go through what we're going through this week. And certainly not just Brown, but all of college athletics, professional athletics. It's unbelievable.
Do you have any past experiences, before we get into the details of what's going on right now, are there any past experiences that you can draw upon? And I know you and I have talked off the air about this, Hurricane Katrina, 9/11. Give us examples of those situations, where you were and what was done at the time.
Yeah, so if you go in order, 9/11, I was at the University of Connecticut at the time. I believe that the games that week, and certainly the games that weekend, right? Brown was actually scheduled to go to California that weekend.
We were opening up with the University of San Diego in football, and that game was canceled.
Yep. So those were canceled. I can't recall after that if there were flight restrictions or games canceled. Hurricane Katrina, for most of us, we weren't impacted, but if you were a school down in the South, certainly if you were at Tulane or the University of New Orleans, I'm not sure what other schools in Louisiana, I think there were schools in Mississippi that were affected by it too. I'm sure for those schools, they dealt with situations that we're probably dealing with now. Where do students go? What happens eligibility-wise? Can they remain on campus? All types of those situations. But the rest of us weren't really affected by that. Indirectly, I wouldn't say we were affected. We were involved because I was at Hofstra at the time when we had a Tulane student transfer to Hofstra.
Right.
So we learned more about it. We were certainly more involved than most schools outside of the region. But I think for a lot of things, what usually happens is if we're not directly affected by it, we don't really think much about it. And as we go through these things now you could look back and say, wow, I wonder what Tulane, not just in athletics as an institution, what did they really go through when that happened?
Jack, somebody said to me a few days ago, when people from institutions like Brown University, Harvard, Stanford, Johns Hopkins are saying the things that they're saying about this COVID-19 situation and making the recommendations and taking the actions that they are, we should listen, because these are some of the brightest and most educated people in the world. And Brown University and the Ivy League really have been at the forefront of this COVID-19 outbreak, how to deal with it. And I think we've seen other people, other leagues follow the lead of the Ivy League.
No question. And like anything else, the toughest calls, I think, are probably are made by those who go first. And then after that, it's pretty interesting to see how quickly others did the same thing. It would have been very interesting if the situation that came about in the NBA had happened before anything else. So now you have a situation with the Jazz, right?
Right.
That the Utah Jazz have a player who tests positive. Then the next day, another member of that team did. If that had happened first, and all of a sudden the NBA stopped, I'm sure it would have been interesting. But before any of those cases took place, as far as I know, it's before, the Ivy League made what would be considered a tough call. Before, and they were doing that because whatever information they had, and they felt it was in the best interest of every student and every campus. And then once that occurred, other leagues followed, and then the situation happened in the NBA.
So I did not see the email from President Paxson and Brown University a week ago, last Friday, until after I signed off the air up at Harvard. The Brown basketball team played at Harvard that evening.
Yep.
And we had received an email, I think, somewhere in the 5 o'clock range or thereabouts, telling us about the situation and certain measures were being put into place. So after reading that email that evening and then waking up the next morning and seeing the comments of LeBron James, who was asked, if you have to play in front of an empty arena with no fans, would you do it? And he said, no way, I'm not playing. I play for the fans. There's no way I'm playing a game without fans. So I went on the radio Saturday morning and I said, I really think this thing's really going to start to evolve very quickly. And I said at the time, I'm not sure if there's going to be an Ivy League postseason tournament for men's or women's basketball. And I said, I think it's going to really go even farther than that. And lo and behold, here we are. And really, the whole world of sports has been completely shut down.
Pretty interesting how the impact that sports has. Everybody's been paying attention to this for the last, how long has it been? 2 months?
Yeah.
At least, right? But has it really gotten the attention, and did it really pick up the momentum at any other point during that period of time until the sports world was affected? I'm sure it has, and here, we all have a distorted view on sports because we live it every day.
Sure.
But there have been some things that happened in the last few days that most of us would never, ever believe would take place. We had the cancellation of all NCAA tournaments. The Final Four, which is just considered like this, an event that's above all else. The whole basketball championship canceled. First, it seemed unbelievable that professional sports would be played with no one in attendance. And then it went from there to not being played at all. And I think that there's probably, by timing and coincidence, all of these other decisions that are affecting schools and affecting cities probably would have happened anyway. But the fact that they're coming on the heels of all these major sports decisions taking place is pretty interesting.
You had multiple meetings and conversations with your head coaches here at Brown. I'm curious as to how those meetings went, and I ask that because it seems pretty much universal that everybody, while disappointed with the decision, completely understands why these measures have to be taken.
I think the decisions that took place, or the conversations that took place within athletics and our coaching staff, were taking place at every school, and I think they were taking place across campus outside of athletics. And I think it would be fair to say, if you asked any of those folks, not just on campuses, what's going on publicly, what's going on in things that we've referred to already, like the NBA, you could have a conversation and lay out a plan, and 2 hours later it needs to change. And that literally happened to us on the day of the announcement that the spring season was going to be discontinued. We met with the coaches at 11 o'clock in the morning that here's what was going to take place for the spring sports, and here's how we were going to have to handle everything else in the spring season for the fall and winter sports, because they were going to be under very different rules, let's call it. And 3 hours later, 3.5 hours later, literally, from 11 o'clock to 2:30, it then changed to the spring season was over entirely, and that the school year was going to end.
And it was such a surreal day Wednesday, wasn't it, when we found out that they were shutting down all spring sports, and our women's lacrosse team hosted the 23rd ranked team in the country, Virginia Tech, that afternoon, and we knew that was going to be the final athletic event of the academic year here at Brown University. And I guess what a way to go out. The women beat Virginia Tech in a very exciting game. And what was really neat to see was our men's team there in full force supporting their female
Surreal is a great word to use. I mean, you just would never expect, how do you prepare for it? You can't. And so as we had those conversations with the coaches, Keely McDonald, she did the head women's lacrosse coach. Our conversation was very interesting because the word was going to come out at 3 o'clock. Our game was at 4. And we went back and forth about whether or not you tell the team before the game is played. And to her credit, and I wanted to leave this up to her, to whatever she thought was best, she said, I think we should tell them ahead of time and let them know. And she did, and it was tough. But then they played great in what was the last game of the year at Brown. And I give her credit and the team credit. And, yes, the men's lacrosse team credit for being there. And really all the spring sports students. Very tough and a very tough situation for the seniors. We referred earlier to a couple other situations that have happened throughout the country in the last 20 years. The other ones took place early in the school year, and it was easier for, without being disrespectful to any of these situations, but for the students and their own eligibility, there was much more time to navigate through how to do that.
Right.
This is unprecedented, and it takes place in the middle of a season that's at the end of the school year, that's moving towards the end of the school year.
It is certainly unfortunate for the seniors in particular, but the NCAA did make a ruling that they are going to grant eligibility to spring student athletes an additional year that will have been lost this spring because of this situation. Having said that, as you know, the Ivy League operates a little bit differently. The Ivy League does not give you 5 years to play for,
right,
as other Division I conferences and institutions do. So
yep.
I don't know if the league even plans on visiting this topic or if it's just business as usual. And if you want to use that extra year of eligibility, you'll have to do so elsewhere in grad school.
If you want to use the extra, here's what I know so far. If you want to use the year of eligibility, you certainly can do that at another institution. We've had a number of students here do that in all sports who have graduated from Brown and then pursued a graduate degree and competed in that last year in their fourth year of eligibility at another institution. How we work through this, it's complicated, it's emotional, but we've got to figure out what we can do, what we can't do, and try to provide the students with that information as soon as we can. But as we talked earlier, with things changing every day, I don't know how soon we would be able to do that. But you certainly want to give them as much information as they can so they can make an informed decision.
It's interesting, the NCAA subcommittee that made that ruling to grant spring student athletes an additional year of eligibility, I am told is also going to at least discuss the eligibility of winter student athletes, but I can't necessarily come up with a way logically to say that they should get an additional year of eligibility because their seasons, for the most part, were, if not already over, pretty much complete.
Certainly their regular seasons were.
Right.
So I don't know to whom you would grant it. Would you grant it to only those that hadn't played in a conference tournament yet? So I think that's a challenging one. And again, it doesn't mean we're not sympathetic to a school that was in a conference tournament and could potentially have anybody could potentially have advanced.
Right.
But if you were a team that was probably in great position, if nothing else, to get an at-large bid, yeah, that's a really hard way for their season to end, and in some cases awkward. Games ending shortly before they started, games ending that had already games being stopped that had already started. We'll look at this one for years and just be amazed at that what took place, and so yeah, that one it should be reviewed. Like anything should. It should be reviewed, but I think the spring one, really every institution is in the same situation.
Right.
They may have exceeded the percentage of games in which a year of eligibility was exhausted, but that's going to be waived. But whether they had or had not, most schools at this point in most sports had not even played a conference game yet. Now, we had in women's lacrosse, but most people had not even played a conference game yet. So
right.
I think the institutions, with respect to their spring sports, are all. It's if you're at the NCAA, it's easier to look at that and say, okay, everybody would be impacted the same way. It's going to be more of a challenge to look at that in the winter. But I do think, in fairness to every student in every sport, you would have to give it its due and at least review it.
I don't know if you had a chance to talk to your good friend, Danny Gavitt, who works for the NCAA, but obviously the NCAA men's basketball tournament is his baby, so to speak. And that is really, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is by far and away the largest revenue generator for the NCAA. It supports that organization. So canceling it was not something that was easily done, but again, the right thing to do, the men's and women's postseason tournaments. And it's my understanding that it is probably impossible to reschedule it. Even if this curve flattens out and it goes back in the direction that we all hope that it does, and the spread of the virus is curtailed, it seems like there would be no way to make up the NCAA tournament this year.
Yeah, I don't know. Dan Gavitt's a great guy.
Yeah.
Very good friend. I can't imagine what he has gone through in the last few days. I think we can all say that about each other. But, yeah, his situation, very challenging. Right guy to be taking a look at it. Can you have it later down the road? As fans, I think we can say there's got to be a way to do it. The logistics would be really challenging.
Right.
Where do you do it? Are those same venues available? I mean, these things have been blocked off for years at some of these venues.
Right.
To then turn around and move it either at the same venues or to other places, I don't know how they would do it.
That same NCAA subcommittee that ruled on the extra year of eligibility for spring student athletes also ruled that from a recruiting standpoint, right now, given the situation we're in, we are now going to be entering a recruiting dead period until at the very least April 15th. And that means no traveling to visit with recruits, no having them come to your campuses. The only type of contact that will be permitted, it's my understanding, will be emails, phone calls, things of that nature.
Yeah, and that's the right move for a number of reasons. The first logical one that has to do with the containment of trying to make sure this does not spread is, should we be bringing people to our campus that are coming from all different places? Should our coaches be going on the road, getting on flights and going to different places? No, they shouldn't.
Right.
The other one is that some schools may have travel restrictions and other schools do not. So if a school had a travel restriction is where only essential travel could be made, and who's to define, if there's a great recruit out there, then most people would say that's essential.
I know a lot of coaches would say that.
A lot of coaches would say that's essential. So, the difference between non-essential and essential and travel and whether another institution had those limitations at all would really complicate things if there was a recruiting event that some coaches could go to and some coaches could not.
Right.
So now the interesting thing is that in the last few days, as that issue has been discussed, many of these recruiting events that would take place have started to be canceled.
Right.
But it does make sense that in fairness, this is an area that everyone should operate under the same guideline. And so that's why that was put in place. And April 15 is just to figure out where we are with this whole spread to decide if that should be extended. I don't think April 15 is a magic date. I think it's just a date to come back and review this and see in fact if it should be extended or if people feel like that there's been given enough time to move forward.
And if we can go into some of the details of how Brown University in particular is handling things, all students have been encouraged to go home if they can, effective today.
Right.
Classes next week, which were scheduled the week before spring break, have been canceled.
Right.
They will have their normal spring break the following week, and then after spring break is over with, the remote learning begins, correct?
As I understand it, that's the case. Yep.
And I also understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that residence halls and dining will be made available to those students who are unable to get home in a timely fashion or whatever the case may be. Is that accurate at the moment?
As I understand it, that's accurate. When you have a school that attracts students from all over the world, their situations are vary significantly. And it sounds easy to just say everybody out.
Right.
It may be difficult. There are certain countries, as we know, where this has been a significant issue for a while. What happens to the students that are from there? Is that where they're supposed to go?
No.
There are cases. Brown has always done a great job of looking at things on a case-by-case basis and trying to support and help students. And that's probably what is ongoing now and will continue to take place to see how students can be best helped.
So really the mission of the school, and I think everybody at this time, is try to promote as much social distancing if you can.
The new phrase.
That's right, to contain the spread
Yeah.
of this virus. And,
Yep.
and Brown's way of doing that is trying to clear the campus of as many students. And they've even told employees, if you can do work from home,
Right.
by all means do work from home. Try to thin out the population on campus, and really everywhere for that matter, to reduce the person-to-person contact that obviously spreads a virus like this.
And so for a while this was, this was taking place in Italy.
Right.
And then, all right, it made its way here, but this is really a problem for the people in California. Now there's cases right here in Rhode Island,
Right.
and everywhere else. And I think that the other thing that's interesting about it is how these things were taking place as schools were approaching their spring break. So here comes a time where students are going to go everywhere,
Right.
and then all come back. And a lot of the announcements of different schools were coincided with their spring break to avoid just that. Students leaving, going to different parts of the country or different parts of the world, and then coming back to the campus just a week to 10 days later. And what could that potentially have caused?
And Brown did mention that 3 members of the university population were tested for COVID-19, and thankfully all 3 of
Yep.
those tests came back negative.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm sure, knowing the university and the way they operate, I'm sure they had a certain action plan in place that if those had come back positive, that different measures would have been taken at that moment in time.
I agree. We may have seen some of the things that are happening right now happen earlier.
Well, I would much rather talk to you about the women's soccer team winning an Ivy League championship, Mike Martin's basketball team finishing strong, and it's unfortunate because there were some postseason tournaments that had an interest in the men's basketball team.
And we were definitely one of them, and had we had the opportunity, we would have pursued it. I think the experience that we had last year in that tournament proved to be very helpful. You know, you look back on that, and I think sometimes people always wonder, like, how beneficial are those? Well, for one thing, we played – you've seen enough games here in the Pizzatola. I thought that UAB was as talented as any team that came in. Mm-hmm. If not as talented, they have to be one of the top 5 teams that played here, talent-wise.
Yeah.
Great win for us. Won that game where we did not have everybody on the roster playing in that game.
Right.
Brandon Anderson didn't play in that game too, right? Wasn't he hurt that day?
I know Desmond Cambridge
right.
didn't.
I don't think Brandon Anderson played. But we saw Jalen Gainey. We saw Jalen Gainey in that game and the next game at Loyola Marymount.
That was really his coming out party this
No question. No question. And I don't know. I mean, can you think of anybody who played so few minutes as a freshman get a conference player of the year, not player of the year, defensive player of the year,
yeah.
but to get a conference award as a sophomore?
No, and in fact, if there were a most improved player award, I would think that he would have been the leading candidate for that.
In the country.
Yeah.
Certainly in the Ivy League.
Yeah.
He would have to be a potential. He would have to be a candidate for that award nationally, don't you think? I mean,
absolutely.
The stats are there from a block shot standpoint. The scoring's coming, the rebounding's coming, but his just general impact and effect on the game from a guy who played very little last year, I haven't seen anything like it.
Well, here's a guy that put on 35 to 40 pounds of good weight in the weight room, eating right, lifting weights.
Working hard.
Really transformed his body. And you talk about all the things that he did in terms of block shots, scoring points. Something he gets no credit for because there's no stat for it. How about all the shots that he's altered?
No
right?
question.
Guys that come in the lane and all of a sudden they see Jalen Gainey and say, "Uh-oh," and they change the trajectory of their shot into a miss.
Or they don't take that shot, and
right.
maybe there's a turnover somewhere along the way. And that's the thing that he did. And I've just never seen someone. You'll see someone statistically change. I think we saw it on the women's side when Taylor Will averaged maybe 1 point a game as a freshman on the women's basketball team, and then averaged 11 as a sophomore.
Right.
Yeah, numbers that went up significantly. And while all his numbers, although his block shot number did, but while all his numbers went up somewhat modestly, his impact on the game from a defensive end, I just in the difference of 1 year. I thought was incredible. Even to the point where I think we all felt that it was down the stretch. Could you afford Coach Martin's call? And a lot of it had to do with where we were in the game and what was Jalen's foul situation. But you did start to wonder how long could you keep? How long could he stay out of the game before you had to have him back in?
Yep. Two other things to wrap up with. Number one, let's go to spring sports. What a great way to end, unfortunately, a shortened season.
Yeah.
Women's lacrosse beats a ranked Virginia Tech team. Men's lacrosse had a super exciting win over 8th-ranked Virginia here, and then also track and field with some individual success as well.
Yeah, and again, that's where on the track and field one, some of those students had opportunities to participate in NCAA championships, which were then canceled, which is certainly too bad. And so I feel for everyone involved there. And the two lacrosse wins were, if that's how we have to finish the 2019-2020 year, it ended on as high a note as you could have with wins over ranked teams from the ACC, and again, bittersweet because it's the last game that some of those students will likely have played for Brown and in their college career. But they would have been the last games if they had played at Brown and in their college career if we lost them.
Right.
So better off that we won. And when we played the women's game, unfortunately, we were limited as to how many people we could have at the game. We were under that guideline then about restricted attendance. For the men's game on Sunday, atmosphere was great. So many people back, and a great one that, although it's, as we said, bittersweet, that'll be one that we can look back on years down the road, even without having to say, that was the last game of the year. Instead, we can say that was really a great win over a defending national champion team.
And lastly, it was a few years ago that Dylan Malloy and the Brown men's lacrosse team played here in the postseason at Brown Stadium, and what an atmosphere that was. And Brown was again going to host the NCAA Lacrosse Regional here in Providence, but obviously with all of the cancellations, that will now no longer happen.
Too bad to not have that event. And yes, we were going to host that, which some may not know that when we hosted it in 2016, that had already been awarded to Brown in 2013. It was done so far in advance. It wasn't that we just hosted it because we were the higher seed, we certainly weren't the highest seed remaining here because we had Maryland that was the number 1 seed in the whole event.
Right.
But that was predetermined, as this one was, and we'll look to get it back. It was such a good event. It was great because we were in it, but a great event to host, and we've worked with the NCAA in hosting hockey at the Dunk, and anytime we can bring events like that to Brown, I think it's great for everyone. So missed opportunity for us, but we'll look to do it again.
Well, Jack, I'd like I said, much rather talk under more pleasant circumstances, but I can't thank you enough for joining us and kind of going through everything that has been involved with what has transpired over the past week here at Brown and nationally.
And Brown's been great. President Paxson has been so supportive of athletics, recognizing that we were really impacted in some unique ways by this, and thanks to her for her guidance on it. Thanks to the coaches. Tough spot for coaches to be in, spring sport coaches to go into locker rooms and explain the situation to their teams. And as you see when you walk the hallways, the fall sport and the winter sport coaches, although they weren't directly affected by it, they felt really bad.
Absolutely.
They felt really bad for their colleagues. But one of the neat things about this place is the coaches know who the athletes on other teams are. So, coaches have already mentioned to me, really tough situation for Phil Goss, the great goaltender from men's lacrosse, and really tough situation for this person. And the coaches have been great, and it makes it a great place to work.
He is Brown Director of Athletics Jack Hayes. My name is Scott Cordischi. Thanks for watching the Brown Bears Sports Report.